Greetings and welcome to an LGR thing. And this thing right here is the Tapwave Zodiac. Released in October of 2003 for a price of $299 for this silver model with 32 megabytes of RAM known as the Zodiac 1, and $399 for a black 128 meg model known as the Z2. So, what is this? Well, the Zodiac was described by Tapwave as a mobile entertainment console, built specifically to appeal to gaming and technology enthusiasts aged 18 to 34 who have quote-unquote outgrown a Game Boy and need a device that can help organize their life. Yeah. More accurately, it's a short-lived and increasingly forgotten gaming-focused personal data assistant or PDA, running a customized version of Palm OS 5.2T and became one of the most high-profile failures in early 2000s tech. In my mind, the Zodiac is right up there, or down there, with the Nokia N-Gage and the Gizmondo. Just one of several of those failed devices from the early 2000s that attempted to merge the features of handheld consoles and a PDA. But the main reason the Zodiac stood out to me back then was because it ran Duke Nukem Mobile, a unique version of Duke Nukem 3D originally made exclusively for the system. But more on that in a bit, because just looking at this packaging gives you a good idea what Tapwave was trying in vain to accomplish. Enjoy true console-quality gaming, listen to music, view photos, watch videos, take control with leading organization tools, and customize it with thousands of Palm OS applications. Yeah, this mashup of PDAs and portable game consoles was not an uncommon idea at the time, and it kind of made sense when it was announced in May of 2003, but by the time it came out later that year, it was making less sense month to month. Let's start out with Tapwave Incorporated themselves, a company founded in 2001 by ex-Palm executives with the goal of producing a gaming device centered on the Palm operating system. And in case you're not familiar, in 2001, Palm was practically on top of the world in terms of mobile computing. Their PDAs bridged the gap between the functionality of a laptop computer and the mobility of a contemporary cell phone. And Tapwave was one of the many companies jumping on the bandwagon to do something fresh with the platform, which in the case of the Zodiac was focusing on mobile gaming first and foremost. Simple 2D games were already a good fit on Palm PDAs with their color touchscreens, providing a nice way to play solitaire and various puzzle games, but Tapwave took it a step beyond any other Palm OS device, and indeed, further than any portable game console. Keep in mind when Tapwave was putting together the Zodiac, the major handheld on the North American market was the Game Boy Advance by Nintendo. A system that was great for games, no doubt, but seen by some, like those at Tapwave, as being a bit childish and really couldn't hold a candle to the multimedia capabilities of a PDA. So when Tapwave announced that the Zodiac would combine all the software and multimedia and color touchscreen stuff of a Palm OS 5 PDA with an analog joystick, 200 MHz ARM9 processor, ATI graphics, and wireless multiplayer, the gaming and technology press were psyched. The Zodiac ended up winning all kinds of awards. There were over 1,200 game developers reportedly signed up to make games for it, and pre-orders started pouring into Tapwave. The future was bright. And then it wasn't. For one thing, the Zodiac struggled with distribution, only being sold through Tapwave's website during its launch window, and sales remained glacially slow even when it started being sold in stores like CompUSA. And then there were the games themselves, which were few and far between at best and lackluster the rest of the time. Zodiac launched with a few recognizable IPs like Duke Nukem, Doom, and Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, but there were already other games in these series available on the much cheaper Game Boy Advance. Then there was the fact that the Zodiac was not alone, with Nokia's N-Gage releasing at the same time, while also including the ability to place phone calls and send text messages. And the latter point was pretty important since the PDA market was quickly moving away from dedicated PDAs and more towards hybrid devices like the Trio 600, T-Mobile Sidekick, and the BlackBerry 6210, giving the public an early, intoxicating taste of what would become known as the smartphone. While the Zodiac was stuck having to tether to a cell phone, a modem, or a PC to go online, using infrared, Bluetooth, or a sync cable, and didn't come with built-in Wi-Fi at all. And then finally, you get the DS hitting the scene in 2004, the Sony PSP set to launch in fall of 2005, and cell phone games running on J2ME and Brew were just exploding, and so the writing was on the wall. Tapwave only sold around 200,000 Zodiacs over its entire time in the market, and shut down all service and support for the device on July 25th of 2005, and then selling off the rest of the company to an unknown buyer. Well, there's a mini tech tales for you, so let's go ahead and unbox this device, which I found complete-ish on eBay a while back for about $100. And first up here in this little tray, we get the Zodiac 1 itself. We'll talk about the specifics of it more here in just a moment. And you get a little baggie with some paperwork and manuals and presumably the software CD. It was supposed to come with a CD of Windows software to do all of the syncing and stuff like that on your PC. And yes, it was originally just for Windows. They released some Macintosh software later. I just downloaded a copy of the software. Anyway, the rest of it in here, you get some cables. This is the charge and sync cable. So you get this end right here that plugs into the device itself, and then the other side can either be USB for doing all of the syncing, or you can attach another piece and plug it into the wall to do straight up charging. You also get a little carrying strap, which I never use these things, so I am leaving it in the plastic. And finally, you get some truly not comfortable Tapwave Zodiac earbud headphones. I don't like these, they make my ear holes hurt. Alright, let's talk about the device itself, and here it is. It's a neat little thingy, weighing about 6.3 ounces or 178 grams, and it's about on par with its contemporary Palm PDAs in terms of size. But compared to a modern hybrid game console, or even a modern smartphone, it is absolutely tiny, and looks charmingly dated with its bulbous rounded blob shape. The early 2000s. I almost missed this style of design, but then I don't. Anyway, underneath its little fold-over leathery cover here, you get a 3.8-inch backlit transflective LCD screen with a resolution of just 480 by 320. And encasing everything is an anodized aluminum shell. Yeah, this thing is not plastic, it is aluminum, which feels pretty solid in the hands, I gotta say. I like that. Look at a little bit closer here, and on the front you get the power button, a home button, an unmarked back button, two tiny speaker holes, one on the left and one on the right, and then one of the biggest selling points, the analog joystick over here. And it's pretty decent to use with most games, but a little bit too slippery for my taste. Could have used some texture or something on the top. You also get 4 rather gummy-feeling face buttons for interacting with menus and games and such over here on the right, and then on the top you get 2 even gummier-feeling shoulder buttons. Seriously, these things suck. There's a bit of a click when you press them down, but it's always a strange struggle to make it happen reliably, especially if you have larger hands. I have issues with the cramped Joy-Cons on the Switch, for instance, but I would take that any day over the awful cramping claw maneuver I have to pull off here. There's also the fact that the flexible rubber on these buttons tends to fall apart, as you can see. In fact, perishing rubber parts are a problem on these in several spots, like around back where you're supposed to be able to hold the stylus. Yeah, no, the little black rubber bits just fall apart and the stylus no longer stays in there. I have to use some sticky tack to hold it in place. You also get a spot on the back for tying in carrying straps, as well as a recessed reset button for resetting things with a button. On top of the unit, you get another button to enable or disable the Bluetooth, as well as dual SD card slots, used for either expanding the storage or inserting game cards. Yep, Zodiac games were distributed on SD cards and came in these DVD-style keep cases. I only have these 2 games, Duke 3D and Doom 2. Really, any Zodiac games can be hard to find, but the packaging is kinda nice in a somewhat boring way. I was happy to find these. And finally, along the bottom, you get a 3.5mm headphone jack, as well as a spot to plug in the combination power charging and sync cable. Speaking of charging, there's a good chance the original battery in any given Zodiac is dead, as mine was when I got it. Thankfully, replacing it is pretty friggin' easy. You just unscrew 4 little Torx screws and then snap off the back, and there you go. You can just drop in a replacement 3.7-volt lithium-ion battery pack, of which new ones that hold a full charge can be found surprisingly easily online, as I'm making this video at least. And while we're in here, check out the chip running much of the show, the amusingly titled Dragon Ball MX1 by Motorola and Freescale Semiconductor. This ARM 209T based system on a chip replaces the old 68K based Dragon Ball and integrates things like USB support, LCD control, analog to digital conversion, and an SD card interface, all working alongside the ATI Imagion W4200 graphics chipset. Okay, let's take a look at what happens when you power on the Zodiac for the first time. Yay, sound effects. Alright, so the initial thing that you have to take care of is the initial setup for the resistive touchscreen. So yes, this is not capacitive, you can't just touch it lightly, you have to press down a bit, and it is ideally used with a stylus, and the calibration is the first thing that you'll be taking care of, as well as some calibration for the analog controller itself. Simple enough stuff. There's just a few other things to choose, like whether you're right or left-handed, the date and the time and your time zone and stuff like that. And then it lets you learn a bit about how Graffiti 2 works. And this, it's supposed to be one of those systems that makes it easier to have your handwriting turned into text, but it's a little more specific than some others I've used. There are only certain ways that you can write it out to have it converted into text. That is, unless you customize it yourself, which I definitely would have to do if I were going to be using this. I would much rather just have a virtual keyboard and type that way, even though that's not ideal either because the tiny little screen results in tiny little characters to tap on. Either way, you get a bunch of stuff that is pretty common across almost any Palm OS 5 device. You know, all of that adult productivity software that makes this so much more grown-up than a Game Boy. You can take memos. You can enter dates into your calendar and make an itinerary. You can read ebooks if you were to go to palmdigitalmedia.com and get an ebook. You can calculate calculations using the calculator calculatingly. You can look at photographs, which is quite a nice thing to have had back then, even though, of course, they are only at 480 by 320. And then probably the most fascinating stuff for me were the video and music options. It used the Kinoma Movie Player by default, which unless you were downloading stuff specifically for that, you'd have to get Kinoma Producer to convert stuff. Naturally, it also has a built-in music application for playing MP3s and such. One of the biggest reasons I wanted a device like this in the mid-2000s. And of course, you could play games, and well, it came with just a couple of them, Solitaire being one of those. It's a pretty decent little Solitaire program, but this is really not what you got this device for. You could play Solitaire on pretty much any PDA ever made, but the Zodiac, well, that was about the Zodiac games. And as I mentioned earlier, the biggest one that I wanted to get was Duke Nukem Mobile, because at the time, this was the only way that you could play this version of the game. It had its own exclusive levels and features and all that kind of stuff. I didn't know anything about it, really. I just saw the screenshots and information on the 3D Realms website and thought it looked awesome and I wanted it. But of course, I never got it until adulthood, and now I am glad that I didn't waste my time, because honestly, this is not a very good game. It looks pretty good, at least. A little bit better than Duke Nukem Advance, which was its contemporary. However, the levels are extremely small. You just get a bunch of enemies that are randomly teleporting in all the time. There's no music. The stuff that each enemy drops it doesn't make any sense for what they're actually shooting. Like, it's just a weird version of the game, and it is further let down by the fact that the controls for this thing suck. Like, I mean, they're programmed fine. It works as it's intended. It's just physically, the controls of the Zodiac are not suited to my hands. I feel like you'd have to be like 12 years old at most for this to make sense, and wasn't this supposed to be the adults gaming portable? Talk about a fatal flaw right off the bat, especially with first-person shooters. I also tried Doom 2, because of course that is the other game for this that I own physically, and it's not much better. In fact, it is probably worse, because this game is sped up significantly compared to the MS-DOS original. It's just way too fast. The music is fast, everything moves faster, the controls are way more responsive than they need to be. It's just really tricky, and as a result, much harder to play. Still, portable Doom 2 would have been pretty friggin' awesome at the time, but then again, if I really wanted that, I would have gotten a Game Boy Advance. But there is one kind of saving grace for the Zodiac, and that is the fact that it is incredibly easy to install your own homebrew and independent software that you've downloaded, and the hot sync capability is dead simple, as you would expect for a Palm OS 5 device. All you gotta do is install the Palm desktop software hot sync thingy from Tapwave, and then press down the hot sync button on the cable or cradle, which is the cable in this case. And there you go, it syncs everything that's on the Zodiac itself to your PC, and whatever you've told the PC to send to the Zodiac, it'll do that too. And yeah, the Palm desktop hot sync software makes it super easy. You just plop a file in there, hit sync, and there you go. Or you can just copy things over directly to an SD card through an SD card reader on any random PC, and then insert it, and chances are, if you've done it correctly, it'll work just fine. And yeah, there was a relatively significant scene of people making their own games and porting source code for other games and just making all sorts of cool stuff for the Zodiac. And of course, it can run a crapload of Palm software as well. I am mostly interested in the Zodiac specific stuff though, since it takes advantage of its hardware in particular. For example, one program that was kind of a killer app for the Zodiac, if you can say that it had one, and that was TCP/MP, or the Core Pocket Media Player. This is available for all sorts of PDA kind of portable devices, but the version for the Tapwave was pretty awesome, since it provided hardware scaling for all kinds of videos, namely DivX, which was very popular at the time. So if you were to encode pretty much anything into DivX and put it on an SD card and play it back through this, you've got a neat little portable media player for watching your favorite YouTube videos offline. And another option for moving around files that just highly amuses me is the Bluetooth functionality. And yes, due to the magic of legacy backwards compatibility goodness, you can make the Tapwave Zodiac communicate with a modern smart device. So I've got a 12 megapixel photograph taken on my Galaxy Note 8, sending over Bluetooth to the Zodiac right here, and there you go. You can admire and edit your photographs right from the built-in software of the Zodiac, even though it is pretty friggin' slow because it's a giant picture, but hey, it works. Another realm that's fascinating to explore with the Zodiac is the area of unreleased games that ended up getting leaked in the years following the device's untimely demise, like this version of Tomb Raider 1 and 2 that never got completed. And it makes sense that there are a good number of unfinished games like this for the system, since so many developers signed on with high expectations, only to see the system fail spectacularly with the gaming public. Kind of a shame too, since the hardware itself really is quite impressive for the blip in time that it existed, and this in-development Tomb Raider build is a good example of that. Same with the homebrew emulator scene, which puts that 200 MHz ARM processor to the test by emulating classic computers, arcade games, and consoles. Sometimes poorly, but well, it tries its best. A soft-modded PSP is still way better in this respect if you're looking for mid-2000s portables with great emulators, but I still find these programs fun to fiddle around with regardless. And that's about it for this video on the Tapwave Zodiac. It's one of the most fascinating tech failures that I remember watching. I really was impressed when seeing the Zodiac reviews in magazines back then, and I thought having an analog joystick and a handheld was an amazing idea. I think its goals of bringing console-like games to a smart device were admirable and forward-thinking. The problems, though, were quite obvious. It was completely off-target in terms of timing and execution for seemingly what most people wanted. It had relatively pricey hardware, few worthwhile games, an increasing number of competitors, and there's the fact that it lacked a built-in cellular data or Wi-Fi connection. Tapwave attempted to remedy this in December of 2004 with a $100 Wi-Fi SD card accessory, but by then it was too late. So it was promptly axed, and the Tapwave Zodiac became just another odd little thing in portable computing history. And its legacy is that it ended up being the third worst selling portable of all time, with only the Gizmondo and the R-Zone selling fewer units. You know you've got a stinker on your hands when even the N-Gage sells 10 times as much. Yet it's precisely because of this failure that I find the Zodiac so intriguing, and I hope that you enjoyed seeing it here on LGR. And if you did enjoy the video, then great. I have plenty more on retro hardware and software, so feel free to peruse my playlists or check back every Monday and Friday for new stuff. And thank you very much for watching.